Test, test, test. Test, test, test. All right, Shalom. I want to start off by giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Makakodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are the elders of Yasha Allah. And a sincere salutation to all Yuakim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Akwat, who are believing this word in all truth and in sincerity. All right, and I want to go into a lesson through the Spirit, all right, on some history, all right, on Hellenization, on what actually happened with our people and how we became Gentiles, all right, in the New Testament, all right, because Christianity has hijacked the scriptures, all right, and created this doctrine that the Gentiles that are saved in the New Testament, all right, are other nations, and that's not true. All right, so we're going to go through the history, all right, and as you can see, I got an article from worldhistory.org. All right, Lord willing, this be edifying. All right, so I'm going to start off with this. Yahweh is the name of the one they ignorantly call God. Yahweh Shai is the name of the one they ignorantly call Jesus. Bahashem is in the name. Rakah is spirit. Kodash is holy. Akyam is brothers. And Akwathium is sisters. All right, and Shalom means peace. All right, so when you deal with the scriptures, you have to understand that there's a context, right? Because in Christianity, they start at the New Testament and they leave out a lot of history. And one of the most important parts of history in order to understand the New Testament is what happened, all right, between Malachi, all right, and Matthew, all right, and Hellenization happened to our people. All right, so I want to go through this article really quick through the Spirit, all right, and it starts at the first paragraph. And it says, Alexander the Great was the son of Philip II of Macedon, and the man who started the Hellenistic era during the 4th century BCE, after inheriting the Macedonian Empire when Philip II died. All right, and what people don't understand, all right, especially Christians, all right, they don't understand how this part of history affected the Israelites. All right, now it was always according to prophecy that this would happen to us and that the Lord would gather us from the places that we were scattered. All right, but part of that history is understanding that a lot of our nation were into these different customs. All right, with Hellenization being one of the most important parts of understanding the New Testament properly. Okay, because when you deal with Alexander the Great, all right, really his father was greater than him. All right, because Philip II really set up Alexander for success. All right, when you deal with the phalanx, all right, which is that battle tactic, all right, it was actually implemented by Philip II. All right, so what Alexander did was he took a great army, all right, and he did what was prophesied for him to do. All right, as a matter of fact, let's go to this. This is Daniel chapter 8. All right, and I'll start at 4. All right, and it reads, and I saw the ram pushing westward. You know what, let's start up. Verse 3 reads, Then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. All right, and that's going into the Persian Medial Empire. All right, the Persians and the Medes and their rulership. Now, what Alexander was able to accomplish would seem impossible if you were living during that time, all right? Because the Persian Medial Empire, all right, or the Medial Persian Empire, all right, was vast, all right? They had a lot of manpower, they had a lot of resources, all right? But according to prophecy, and what we're reading is prophecy, all right? Verse 4 reads, I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand. But he did according to his will and became great. And I saw, and as I was considering, behold, an he goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. All right, and this is Alexander the Great. Okay, and it says that that he touched not the ground, because what he was able to accomplish in roughly 12 years. All right, when you look at Alexander's empire. All right, let's look at let's see if we can get a map. This is what he accomplished in a matter of 12 years. All right, so when you see something like this, All right, it gives you a better understanding of what the Lord is saying. All right, in Daniel's the 8th chapter. All right, this is a lot of land that he conquered in a short amount of time. All right, now what I'm doing is I'm building up to the point of this lesson. All right, which is Hellenization. You have to understand what was happening in the ancient world during that time. All right, and shalom to everybody on the comment board. Shalom. Yahweh Shemel Shah, Ba'ashem Rakakadash Barakatah. So what we're doing right now is we're going through a little bit of history and getting some context into what is happening when we enter into Matthew. All right, when we enter into the New Testament during the Roman Empire, what had transpired right before we get into that area. All right, and what we're dealing with is Alexander. All right, when you go into Daniel's the 8th chapter, all right, and it says again, and as I was considering, behold, an he goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. All right, and he touched not the ground because he accomplished a lot in a matter of 12 years. All right, this is the kingdom that he was able to amass in the time that he was alive. All right, and the scriptures go into that in great detail as well. All right, when you deal with what he was able to do, all right, you begin to understand more why there's no other nation really mentioned in the New Testament. It's the Hellenists, all right, because when you go into that word Gentiles, a lot of times it translates into Hellenist, all right, or Helen, all right, because this was the empire of its day, so to speak. Greek, the Greek culture, all right, was similar to what the American culture is today. It was popular, and a lot of nations were leaving their heritage to follow what looked as a progressive type of lifestyle, all right, including our people. And we're going to get that in the Maccabees, all right. Now, I want to go again to this picture because I do want to hit the point of why this is important to note that look at what he was able to conquer in 12 years. So it tells you that his feet touch not the ground. I got you. Real quick, let's go to it. So real quick right here with Empire of Alexander. When you look at this vast empire, all right, when you look at this and you see that it says his feet touch not the ground, in 12 years he was able to accomplish a lot. All right, and that's how we understand, all right, that we were in a time, all right, of prophecy. All right, you have to understand that this is what happens when we enter into this time of the New Testament. These things had transpired. All right, so when you go into Hellenization, all right, it reads real quick, jumping down, it says this: Hellenization was the process of disseminating Greek culture and language throughout the areas Alexander had conquered, and this process continued after his death. Led by his generals Ptolemy and Seleucus, the 4th century BCE also saw the rise of Greek philosophy with the lives of Plato and Aristotle, who was Alexander's tutor. All right, so you have to understand that Hellenization had happened to all of those areas in the Mediterranean. All right, the Persian culture, all right, every nation in that area were affected by this. All right, and for Ebenezer, all right, when you deal with David being described as ruddy, he was described as ruddy because it was in comparison to the dark complexion of the Israelites at that time. All right, similar to guys being called red, all right, in this day and age. Okay, now the subject of this lesson is Hellenization, and I can do a lesson on that later. All right, so continuing, when we go to this article here, it says from jewishvirtuallibrary.org, it says ancient Jewish history, Hellenism, okay? And it says Hellenism is the term generally used by historians to refer to the period from the death of Alexander the Great to the death of Cleopatra and the incorporation of Egypt in the Roman Empire in 30 BCE. All right, now I'm going to jump down to this second paragraph. All right, it says the word Hellenism and Hellenistic have a long history in which the text of Acts of the Apostles 6 and 1 plays a central part because it opposes Hebreo to Hellenista. All right, because you have to understand that this had largely affected our people. All right, when you deal with Hellenism, Just like when you think about democracy, right? When you think about the American culture and how it's spread across the planet and how other nations have left their customs to adopt the American culture, you start to understand why. When you put your mindset in that place, you can understand how our people became Gentiles during that time. All right. So when we go into Hellenism, that was our people being seduced by these different doctrines. As a matter of fact, before I get the Maccabees, this is Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 26. And it reads, the righteous is more excellent than his neighbor, but the way of the wicked seduceth them. All right. And that's exactly what happened. All right. The ways of the wicked seduced our people. Because when you get into the Maccabees, all right, you start to see our people veer off again, all right, into another culture. And that culture happened to be the Greek customs and the Greek culture, which is why when you see the word Gentile in the New Testament, it oftentimes breaks down into Hellenistas, all right, because that was the popular culture of its time. All right, Rome really just adopted and perfected the Greek culture. All right, so when you get into the time of Matthew, if you don't understand this part of history, all right, you will think that the Christian narrative is correct. All right, but when you actually sit down and understand the history that happened, the things that happened to our people and other nations, Hellenism didn't just affect our people, it affected all the nations round about. All right, as a matter of fact, when you go to this article, it says this. I'm going to start here. It says the word Hellenism is also used to indicate more generically the cultural tradition of the Greek-speaking part of the Roman Empire between Augustus and Justinian, and or the influence of Greek civilization on Rome, Carthage, India, and other regions which were never part of the empire of Alexander. Finally, Hellenization is used with reference to Judea, all right, Persia, etc., to indicate the penetration of elements of Greek civilization into territories which, though subject to Greco-Macedonian rule for a certain period of time, preserved their national culture with conspicuous success. All right, and when you go into this word conspicuous, it goes into roughly paraphrasing obvious. All right, here it is. It says standing out so as to be clearly visible. Because when Alexander was alive, all right, Alexander really allowed our people to keep their customs. It wasn't until Alexander died that our people began to lose our customs by the penalty of death. Okay, this is how our people became Gentiles. Because Hellenization just wasn't small, all right? And we have to put our mindset in the time period that they were living in, where our people were literally being put to death for keeping the customs. Some of our people consented. All right. Some of our people actually wanted to adopt the Greek customs. And some of our people, for fear of death, kept the customs of the other nations and defiled themselves. All right. So let's go into the scriptures and start at First Maccabees, the first chapter. All right. And it reads, and it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Chetam, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead the first over Greece. And a big part of history is understanding that there was a huge difference between the Macedonians and the Grecians of that time. All right, because the original Greeks go back to Japheth, and the Macedonians at that time they were looked down upon. And these are things that are long forgotten in history. All right, that there were battles between Alexander, all right, and the Greek city states. All right, before he started to conquer Persia and started to go against the Persian Empire, he had to put down a lot of revolts in the area of Greece. And a lot of people don't know this part of history. And when you don't understand that there's a separation, because when you see First Maccabees, the first chapter, it clearly says that he was the first over Greece, the first in his stead, in his lineage. All right, because they were Macedonians and they had conquered the Greek city states. And you have to understand this part of history to really understand how our people became Gentiles. It was a slow and steady process, and it was a brutal one, man. By penalty of death, our people were not allowed to keep the customs. And a lot of our people died All right. And then you had a lot of our people who turned coat. They jumped ship because the pressure got too hot. So when you fast forward into Matthew, you have to understand who those Gentiles are that the Lord is speaking of. All right, that Paul is speaking of. These are Israelites that had been in these lands, that had kept these customs, but now wanted to return to their heritage. And they had access because they were still the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. See, Christianity leaves out a huge portion of history that if you don't touch, you won't understand the scriptures properly. All right, so when we go to First Maccabees, the first chapter and the first verse, and it reads, and it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Chittim, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead the first over Greece, and made many wars, and won many strongholds, and slew the kings of the earth, and went through to the ends of the earth, and took spoils of many nations, insomuch that the earth was quiet before him, whereupon he was exalted, and his heart was lifted up. And this reminds me again of Daniel's the 8th chapter, when we go to the 5th verse, and it reads, and as I was considering, behold, an he goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. All right, so the earth was quiet before him because, again, according to prophecy, he was set up to fulfill the will of the heavenly Father. All right, now when we continue in the Maccabees, verse 3 reads, and went through to the ends of the earth, and took spoils of many nations, and so much that the earth was quiet before him, whereupon he was exalted, and his heart was lifted up. And he gathered a mighty strong host, and ruled over countries, and nations, and kings, who became tributaries unto him. And this is that vast empire, all right, that he was able to amass while he was alive. All right, so when the scriptures say, again, verse verse 4, and he gathered a mighty strong host, and ruled over countries and nations and kings, who became tributaries unto him. He accomplished this in 12 years. All right, this is why the scriptures say his feet touched not the ground. All right, continuing, roughly paraphrasing. All right, and it reads, verse 5, and after these things he fell sick, and perceived that he should die. Wherefore he called his servants, such as were honorable, and had been brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdom among them while he was yet alive. So Alexander reigned 12 years, and then died, and his servants bare rule, every one in his place. Now you have to understand, when these generals begin to reign, all right, Cassander, Seleucus, Lysimachus, and Ptolemy. All right, they still carried the Greek customs, even though they were warring with each other in lands that they conquered. They still were pushing Hellenization. All right, and this is how we get caught up in the Seleucid Empire, dealing with Antiochus or Antiochus. All right, and this is where you get a lot of the things that went down in the Maccabees from the Seleucid Empire. All right, so when we continue, verse 8 reads, and his servants bare rule, every one in his place. And after his death, they all put crowns upon themselves. So did their sons after them many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth. All right, and there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus or Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, son of Antiochus the king, who had been an hostage at Rome, and he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. In those days went there out of Israel wicked men, who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us. For since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. So these are guys who are basically being jumping ahead of the gun. Now, Hellenization was already going to happen, but it shows you that there was always a wicked root amongst our people, all right, who were always seduced by the popular nation at that time. All right. Greece at that time was like America or like Egypt during its day. It was the popular culture. It was the culture that everybody wanted to adopt to be seen as progressive, as up to date, as up to speed. And our people got caught in that same madness. All right. Just like our people now who are convinced that they're Americans. All right, they eat hot dogs and they wear red, white, and blue on the 4th of July. They were seduced. All right, and 2/3 of our people, it was prophesied that they would stay in that mindset until the Lord destroyed them. All right, but this, you have to understand this context in order to understand who those Gentiles are in the New Testament that are being saved, that are being called. All right, Hellenization happened. So when we continue, it reads, then certain of the people were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinances of the heathen. All right, and this is what happened. Our people begin to fall into the customs of the Greeks. That's why you don't hear in the New Testament a lot of discussion about other nations outside of the Greeks, the Greek speaking or Hellenistas, because that was the popular culture of that day that our people were seduced and got into. All right, so when we continue, I want to jump down to the point. All right, so I'm going to jump down to this one towards the end. And it says this at verse 44. All right, you know what? Let's start up at 41. Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people. All right, and everyone should leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion and sacrificed unto idols and profaned the Sabbath. For the king had sent letters by messengers unto Jerusalem and the cities of Judah, that they should follow the strange laws of the land, and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice, and drink offerings in the temple, and that they should profane the Sabbaths and festival days, and pollute the sanctuary and holy people, set up altars and groves and chapels of idols, and sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beasts, that they should also leave their children uncircumcised, and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanliness and profanation. All right, and let's get this word profanation. Profanation. Yep. So profanation going into profane or profaning, the act of profaning, desecration, defilement. All right, this is how our people became Gentiles in a sense. All right, when you go into Maccabees, it tells you that it was unlawful for us to even be proclaim ourselves to be a Jew. All right, continuing in First Maccabees, the first chapter. Verse 49 reads, to the end they might forget the law and change all the ordinances. And whosoever would not do according to the commandment of the king, he said he should die. So you have to understand that this is the pressure that was put on our people during that time. And then you fast forward to Matthew, and then you start to see, it starts to make sense. It starts to click as to why our people are considered Gentiles by that time. Because a lot of these who consented to the religion of these other nations, particularly the Hellenization, they had families. All right, and their children begin to adopt these customs, and they forgot the law. All right, just like it says, when you go into verse 49, to the end they might forget the law and change all the ordinances. So this is how our people become Gentiles. But you have to understand, our people were already prophesied to be scattered and then eventually gathered through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shema Shai. All right, the Lord would gather the outcast of Israel. All right, so the Lord knew we was gonna go off. All right, but then He also said that He would restore us. All right, this is Isaiah 11 and 11. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria and from Egypt and from Pathros and from Cush and from Elam and from Shinar and from Hamath and from the islands of the sea. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations and shall assemble the outcast of Israel and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. So what you see happening in the New Testament is a fulfillment of this, of the Lord showing that mercy that was prophesied, even in the law. It was prophesied that the Lord would gather us. All right, when you go into this word outcast, it says to push, thrust, chase, overflow, totter, soar, drive away, or drive out, be outcast, be cast down. And these outcasts of Israel were into these different customs. All right. And the point of this lesson is to highlight um, Hellenization and how it affected our people and how it ultimately defiled our people to a point where they were called and considered Gentiles, especially amongst the circumcision. This is the controversy of the circumcision and the uncircumcision. Amongst our family, you had those who still kept the laws, who rejected the thought of those who rejected the law, that they could never come back. In their mindset, they were unclean and they were just like the heathens. This is why you see this in John the 7th chapter. It says, then I'll start at 34. You shall seek me and shall not find me. And where I am, let's get red letter. You shall seek me and shall not find me. And where I am, thither ye cannot come. Then said the Jews among themselves, whither will he go that we shall not find him? Will he go into the dispersed among the Gentiles and teach the Gentiles? All right, so this is how you understand the controversy of the Gentiles in the New Testament. Our people were defiled. All right, they had been seduced, some by the penalty of death, and some who wanted to follow a multitude to do evil, and they defiled themselves. All right, this is why it says this in Second Maccabees, all right, the 6th chapter. All right, and I'm gonna jump down to, let's start around verse 4. All right, and it reads, for the temple was filled with riot and reveling by the Gentiles, who dallied with harlots and had to do with women within the circuit of the holy places, and besides that, brought in things that were not lawful. The altar also was filled with profane things, which the law forbiddeth. Neither was it lawful for a man to keep Sabbath days or ancient feasts, or to profess himself at all to be a Jew. All right, so these things are under the penalty of death when you deal with Hellenization, and it affected our people in a major way. All right, so when you fast forward to what's going on in the New Testament during the time of Rome, this had already taken place. This is happening before Rome really comes into the picture and comes into prominence. All right, Alexander represents the beginning of that empire. All right, but Rome is the perfection of it, so to speak. And during Alexander's reign, after his reign, our people were convinced or seduced under the penalty of death to make themselves like unto Gentiles. All right. Now, when you deal with the Maccabees, all right, let's go to this. When you deal with the Maccabees, they were putting to death Israelites who were in those customs. All right, I'm gonna go to this. This is First Maccabees 2, and I'm gonna start at verse 42. Then came there unto him a company of Assyrians, who were mighty men of Israel, even all such as were voluntarily devoted unto the law. Also all they that fled for persecution joined themselves unto them, and were a stay unto them. So they joined their forces, and smote sinful men in their anger, and wicked men in their wrath. But the rest fled to the heathen for succor, which means help. So you had some of our people who actually wanted to be joined unto the heathens. They liked the fashion of the Grecians. They liked the glory of the Grecians. All right. Matter of fact, this is Second Maccabees chapter 4 and verse 15. Not setting by the honor of their fathers, but liking the glory of the Grecians best of all. And those who felt like that, they were running from the Maccabees. All right, because the Maccabees were not just going after the heathens that were in the land; they were also killing those Jakes who were into those customs. And that feud, right, between those who kept the customs and those who fled from the customs and ran to the heathens for help, that feud translated into the time of the New Testament during the Roman Empire. This controversy, this family feud, if you will. All right, when you see in John the 7th chapter, Israelites calling other Israelites Gentiles, it's just like Jake who calls other Jakes Uncle Toms or Oreo cookies. all kind of different slang for Jake who has turned their back on black culture, all right, to support or be like the Edomites. The same thing was happening during this time before you even get into Matthew, because Rome was another terror in itself. But Hellenization was the beginning of our people really starting to completely fall out. All right, where you get into this New Testament Gentile that are receiving salvation, and if you don't understand that history, it's easy to lose sight and believe what you're hearing from Christianity. All right, Jake was seduced, but according to prophecy, the Lord would gather His people from the four corners, and the New Testament doctrine, all right, was the fulfillment of that, of the Lord beginning to gather His people with the Word. Matter of fact, let's get that in Baruch. All right, so this is Baruch chapter 4 and verse 37. Lo, thy sons come, whom thou sentest away. They come gathered together from the east to the west by the word of the Holy One, rejoicing in the glory of Yahweh Shema Shah. And it was always prophesied that the Lord would gather his people from the four corners of whether they were scattered. All right, real quick. This is Deuteronomy 30 and 1. And it reads, and it shall come to pass, when all these things are come upon thee, the blessing and the curse, which I have set before thee, and thou shalt call them to mind among all the nations, whither the Lord thy power hath driven thee, and shalt return unto the Lord thy power, and shalt obey his voice, according to all that I command thee this day, thou and thy children, with all thine heart and with all thy soul, that then Yahweh Shema Shai thy power will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations whither the Lord thy power hath scattered thee. So the ministry of the New Testament was a gathering of those Israelites that were scattered, but they were being referred to as Gentiles, all right, because they were into those customs at that time, with the main custom being the customs of the Grecians, all right, or the Romans, if you will. All right, continuing in this article here, it says this. I'm gonna jump down. I'm gonna jump back up. So it says this: Hellenization was the process of disseminating Greek culture and language throughout the areas Alexander had conquered, because the main language was Greece or Greek. All right, Paul was a perfect example of an Israelite who could speak Hebrew, but he could also speak Greek, because that was the language, if you will, of that time during Hellenization. It's the same way pilots have to learn English in order to fly, because the America, if you will, the West, if you will, is the top nation or the top culture of this day and age. This is what's happening before you get into Matthew. Our people have already been seduced, some of them by the penalty of death, some of them liking the ways and the culture of the Grecians better than the culture of their fathers. And all of this is happening at one time. So Yahweh Shai is coming into a world at that time where you had Jake, who was zealous for the law, all right? You had those who had consented to the religion and the culture of the other nations, mainly the Grecians and the Romans, all right? And then you had the Zealots as well, who were not only zealous for the law, but they believed that they could physically overthrow the Roman Empire. So you had three competing doctrines at that time. And Yahweh Shai is smack dab in the middle of it. But our people always understood that there were a dispersed number of our people amongst the other nations, even Caiaphas. All right, because when you go into John the 11th chapter, this is what Caiaphas says. Let's jump down to verse 47. All right, perfect. Then gathered the chief priests and the Pharisees a council, and said, what do we? For this man doeth many miracles. If we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him, and the Romans shall come and take away both our place and nation. And one of them, named Caiaphas, being the high priest that same year, said unto them, ye know nothing at all, nor consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation perish not. Check this out. And this spake he not of himself, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Yahushua should die for that nation, and not for that nation only, but that also he should gather together in one the children of Yahushua that were scattered abroad. Now, this is important, all right? This is important to understand the ministry in the New Testament and who those Gentiles are that are being discussed, that are being saved, that are returning, all right? James 1:1 reads, James, a servant of Yahushua and of the Lord Yahushua HaMashiach, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad, greeting. All right, so you have to understand this in order to properly understand the context of who these Gentiles are. It was always prophesied that the Lord would scatter his people, but that he would gather that remnant from amongst them. As a matter of fact, let's get this. This is Ezekiel 20 and 41. All right, and it reads, you know what, let's start at verse 40. For in mine holy mountain, in the mountain of the height of Israel, saith the Lord power, there shall all the house of Israel, all of them in the land, serve me. There will I accept them, and there will I require your offerings and the first fruits of your oblations with all your holy things. I will accept you with sweet savor when I bring you out from the people and gather you out of the countries wherein ye have been scattered, and I will be sanctified in you before the heathen. These prophecies didn't just go away, they still apply. Otherwise, Christianity is calling the Lord a liar. So when you get into the New Testament, these are the Israelites that are being gathered. But Gentile was a slang term of its time to describe these Israelites who were in that Gentile state of mind. That's why in John the 7th chapter it says, will he go to the dispersed amongst the Gentiles and teach the Gentiles? And you have to understand his history leading up to the time of Yahushua. All right. When you don't understand that history, it's easy to allow Christianity to seduce you. All right. Now, I want to go to this as well because a gathering is happening when you go into the time of the New Testament, a gathering. All right. It was prophesied that the Israelites would be gathered again out of every people and they will be sanctified. All right. This is Jeremiah 31 and 10. Hear the word of the Lord, O ye nations, and declare it in the isles afar off, and say, he that scattered Israel will gather him and keep him as a shepherd doth his flock. For the Lord hath redeemed Jacob and ransomed him from the hand of him that was stronger than he. Redeemed. All right, beautiful. This is Damawathia. Shalom, Makia. This is Galatians 3 and 13. Hamashiach hath redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is every one that hangeth on a tree. So the other nations didn't need to be redeemed from the curse of the law because they didn't receive the law in the first place. This has to be understood. All right. Matter of fact, old but gold. Let's get it. Isaiah 147 and 19. He showeth his word unto Jacob, his statutes and his judgments unto Israel. He hath not dealt so with any nation. And as for his judgments, they have not known them. Praise ye the Lord. And when we continue in Galatians, the 3rd chapter, the 14th verse reads that the blessing of Abraham might come on the Gentiles through Yahushua HaMashiach, that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. Now, notice that Paul is including himself. into this situation. He says that we might receive the promise. When he's talking about the Gentiles, the blessing of Abraham, that now if understand this, right? If there was a separation, if these were actual natural Gentiles, Paul's language would not be from a point of redeemed. This would be a proper introduction, if you will, into the customs of the Israelites. Redeemed from the curse of the law wouldn't even be used if these were natural Gentiles. Furthermore, right, when Paul is talking to the Corinthians, he does this in 1 Corinthians, the 10th chapter. He says this, moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant, how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat. Now, how does that happen exactly if these are natural Gentiles? How did their fathers? All right. How were their fathers baptized unto Moses? All right, in the cloud and in the sea. You have to understand these things and the language Paul is using with these so-called Gentiles, because they're really Israelites. But if you don't understand the time of that day and age, if you don't understand the context, the Israelites who were in the land of Judea, they were beefing with everything moving that wasn't keeping the law. They were beefing. It was beef. And it went back to the wars that the Maccabees had with wicked niggas, man. It was straight beef. So when Yahushua is sitting with publicans and sinners, the Pharisees and the scribes, the wicked ones, they were looking at him like you hanging with the ops, you hanging with the enemy. Even though they're our people, you're still hanging with the enemy, because they were still on that bang. They were banging with the law, man. This is the controversy between the uncircumcision and the circumcision. But if you don't understand this family feud, then you're gonna hop into the New Testament and believe everything your Christian pastor tells you. Gentile was just like Uncle Tom. The same way Uncle Tom is used today, that's how Gentile was used back then for Israelites, to describe Israelites. This is that controversy. And you can tell by the way Paul is writing these letters that he's talking to a particular type of Gentile, if you will. All right, beautiful. This is 2 Corinthians 11 and 22. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. You have to remember this. You have to remember that Paul describes his ministry, all right, in this way. This is 2 Corinthians 5 and 18. I'll start at 18. And all things are of Yahweh Bashem Shai, who hath reconciled us to himself by Yahweh Shai HaMashiach, and hath given to us the ministry of reconciliation. Now, if Paul went to natural Gentiles, he would have the ministry of introduction. It wouldn't be a reconciliation. It would be, hi, meet Yahweh Bashem Shai. This is how you do this. This is what you're supposed to do. It wouldn't be a ministry of reconciliation. This is Paul saying this. Again, he says, and hath given to us the ministry of reconciliation. Verse 19 reads, to wit, that Yahweh Shema Shai was in Hamashiach, reconciling the world unto himself, not imputing their trespasses unto them, and hath committed unto us the word of reconciliation. Now this goes back to Deuteronomy 30 and 3. Then the Lord thy power will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather, all right, thee from all nations, whither the Lord thy power hath scattered thee. And how is he doing that? Baruch 4 and 37. Lo, thy sons come, whom thou sentest away. They come gathered together from the east to the west by the word of the Holy One. This is the ministry of reconciliation, rejoicing in the glory of Yahweh Shema Shai. But you have to understand this context. You have to understand that by the penalty of death, our people had to not even refer to themselves as Jews. And they had families. That generation that Antiochus or Antiochus, That generation that he put those decrees out that they'll be put to death if they keep the Sabbaths, that they have to participate in unlawful sacrifices, that they're not permitted to call themselves Jews. Those people had children. Those Israelites had children. Some of them went off to another land to hide from the Maccabees who was kicking ass, man. Israelites who were keeping the Grecian laws were looked at as traitors and they were getting put to death. Let's go back to that, man. Let's go back to that. I believe it's verse 44. First Maccabees 2, and I'll start at verse 42 again. Then came there unto him a company of Assyrians, who were mighty men of Israel, even all such as were voluntarily devoted unto the Lord. Also all they that fled for persecution joined themselves unto them, and were a stay unto them. So they joined their forces, and smote sinful men in their anger, and wicked men in their wrath. But the rest fled to the heathen for succor. And you notice that those wicked men and those sinful men were Israelites. Why? Because it says the rest fled to the heathen. So they weren't heathens themselves. But they ran to the heathens for help because they wanted to keep the customs of the Grecians. We have to understand these things in order to properly understand who Paul is talking about and who he's talking to in the New Testament. All right, real quick. This is Isaiah 54:8 from GMS in his likeness. And it reads, in a little wrath I hid my face from thee for a moment, but with everlasting kindness will I have mercy on thee, saith the Lord thy power. So when you go back to the precept the brother brought out in Galatians 3 and 14, it says that the blessing of Abraham might come on the Gentiles through Yahweh Shai HaMashiach, that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. Why? Because this is that mercy that the Lord is talking about in Isaiah and in Ezekiel, all right, and in Jeremiah. That mercy that he promised to his people, even though we were off. Some of our people who joined themselves unto the heathens, who loved the ways of the heathens. All right, real quick, this is Lamentations 4. And I'm going to jump down to verse 20. The breath of our nostrils, the anointed of the Lord, was taking in their pits, of whom we said, under his shadow we shall live among the heathen. So you've always had that sentiment amongst our people who saw the nation that was on top at that time winning, and they wanted to join themselves unto them. But mercy was still promised according to the Lord's words, and that remnant will be gathered. And that's the remnant that you see in the New Testament who are referred to as Gentiles. All right, this is Isaiah 10 and 21. The remnant shall return, even the remnant of Jacob, unto the mighty power. For though thy people Israel be as the sand of the sea, yet a remnant of them shall return. The consumption decreed shall overflow with righteousness. So these are those heathens being gathered in the New Testament. All right, this is why it says this in Ephesians, the 2nd chapter. All right, in verse 11, it reads, wherefore remember that ye being in time past Gentiles, in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision, in the flesh made by hands. All right, and this goes back to that controversy of those who kept the laws in the land of Judea, banging on Israelites who wasn't keeping the law. They didn't respect them. They didn't like them. You couldn't even be around them. And Jake got the same type of sentiment in this world when they say you can't hang with the ops, you can't, you can't play the fence, you can't be the middleman. We don't mess with them over there. That was the attitude Jake had with the law. So those who weren't keeping the customs were not respected amongst our people that were keeping the customs. So when it hits harder, it hits different when you see Ephesians 2 and 11. It says, wherefore remember that ye being in time past Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision, in the flesh made by hands, that at that time ye were without Hamashiach, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope, and without Yahweh Shema Shai in the world. Notice Paul's language when he's talking to these Gentiles. Time passed. We all passed under the cloud. All of these different things that are used through the Spirit to describe these Gentiles that were being gathered. And it goes back to the family. All right, real quick, beautiful. Isaiah 54 and 7. For a small moment have I forsaken thee, but with great mercies will I gather thee. This is the great mercy that these Israelites who were at that time wearing togas, who were at that time uh, used to the customs of the Grecians. Part of that was going into these different temples and dedicating certain things to gods. All right, different cities had different provinces, different states had different gods. And to get good fortune in that city, you had to go before that god. Jehu was into all of that, wearing togas. They were returning home, and the Lord was having great mercy on the remnant of them that were returning from amongst that number. Because the adoption was promised to Israel. It wasn't promised to another nation of people. All right, real quick, the point, Romans 9 and 4, who are Israelites, to whom pertaineth the adoption. All right, let's go to that. The adoption, hyothesia, all right, and it says adoption, adoption as sons. All right, the relationship which Yahweh Shema Shai was pleased to establish between himself and the Israelites in preference to all other nations. So this adoption belongs to the Israelites. So these Israelites that are these Gentiles that are being gathered, all right, are Israelites. All right, they're not another nation of people. This all goes back to understanding history and most importantly, understanding prophecy. The Lord said he would gather our nation from out of these different places, from out of these different people, and bring us back to our land. He would clean us up. He would put clean water on us and make us clean again. All right, again, this is Ezekiel 20 and 41, and it reads, I will accept you with sweet savor when I bring you out from the people and gather you out of the countries wherein ye have been scattered, and I will be sanctified in you before the heathen. That's a clear separation. That's a clear-cut separation. And when you put all of these things together, it begins to make more and more sense that these Gentiles in the New Testament are not other nations of people. It's the Lord having mercy on his people as prophesied, man. As prophesied. All right, real quick. This is Luke 1, all right, because then enters the scene, all right, Hamashiach Yahweh Shai, all right, to him will the gathering of the people be. You have to understand his history and the world that Yahweh Shai was walking into, the different competing ideologies and mindsets during that time. You had the zealots, you had the ones who were still loyal and zealous for the law. All right, the zealots were too, but they believed they could physically overthrow that kingdom. All right, and then you had those Israelites who knew that they were Israelites, who just chose to ride with the winning team of that moment. And Yahushua enters into that world, all right, and he understands that there will be some of our people who were amongst those other nations that were prophesied to be gathered. And that's exactly what happened, all right? So this is Luke chapter 1, and I want to jump down to, really all of this is beautiful, but I want to get the point. So I'm going to jump down to verse 67. And his father Zacharias was filled with the Holy Spirit and prophesied, saying, Blessed be the Lord power of Israel, for he hath visited and redeemed his people, and hath raised up an horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David, as he spake by the mouth of his holy prophets, which have been since the world began, that we should be saved from our enemies and from the hand of all that hate us, to perform the mercy promised to our fathers, and to remember his holy covenant, the oath which he sware to our father Abraham, that he would grant unto us that we, being delivered out of the hand of our enemies, might serve him without fear. All right, and that goes back into Ezekiel 20, and 40. All right, and it reads, For in mine holy mountain, in the mountain of the height of Israel, saith the Lord power, there shall all the house of Israel, all of them in the land, serve me. There will I accept them, and there will I require your offerings and the first fruits of your oblations with all your holy things. I will accept you with your sweet savor when I bring you out from the people and gather you out of the countries wherein ye have been scattered, and I will be sanctified in you before the heathen. All right, so when we go to this, all right, in verse 74 in Luke, the first chapter, it says that he would grant unto us that we, being delivered out of the hand of our enemies, might serve him without fear, in holiness and righteousness before him all the days of our life. This was always promised to our nation and none else. All right, so Lord willing, this was edifying, all right, and exhorting, all right, because you have to understand this history. All right, it's important to understand what actually happened between Malachi and Matthew. All right, and Apocrypha deals a lot with the history involved with that, the Hellenization of our people. And then you had Rome come into the scene, all right, which took over all other nations. All right, but before Rome rose to prominence, Hellenization happened to our people, man. All right, and under the penalty of death, a lot of them had become Gentiles. A lot of them willingly. I won't say most, but a lot of them willingly, and a lot of them under the penalty of death and that fear of death. So when Yahushua enters the scene, he's entering into the scene to gather the lost sheep of the house of Israel, all right, who were scattered and always promised to be gathered. All right. Matter of fact, let's get there. This is Luke chapter 15 and 24. And it reads, But he answered and said, I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So his sacrifice made way for the Israelite foreigners to be gathered. All right. And that goes back to Genesis, the 49th chapter, when it says, let's get it. This is Genesis 49 and 9. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down. He couched as a lion, and as an old lion. Who shall rise him up? Who shall rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. So that's what we see. Shiloh comes into the scene with Jake, who were zealous for the law, all right, the actual zealots, and then the Israelites who were just into all these different customs. And Yahushua is coming to gather the people, beginning with the Israelites, all right, the remnant. And some of them were considered Gentiles by the circumcision. They were called uncircumcision by the circumcision. And this was the family feud and family beef. And you have to understand this history to understand who those Gentiles are in the New Testament. This is why to this day Christianity can't really it's so many holes in their doctrine. We can be all day about the holes in their doctrine. At one point they're saying that the new Israel is other nations, and then on another point they're saying that hell is where everybody goes to burn forever. And then all the prophecies have been accomplished concerning the Israelites being gathered and placed in their own land above all nations. It's a whole bunch of madness in Christianity, a whole bunch of confusion, and it's really tied to them misunderstanding a handful of verses in the scriptures. But when you properly understand this history, you can understand in its proper context what the Lord is saying and who he's saying it to and who he's talking to. All right, our people were always promised to be gathered. All right, and I'm going to hit this again because it's a beautiful one. Jeremiah 31 and 10. Hear the word of the Lord, O ye nations, and declare it in the isles afar off, and say, He that scattered Israel will gather him and keep him, as a shepherd doth his flock. For the Lord hath redeemed Jacob, and ransomed him from the hand of him that was stronger than he. And that was the Father's business that Yahushua was coming to accomplish. All right, again, Matthew 15 and 24. But he answered and said, I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. All right, and Jeremiah 50 and 6 reads, My people have been lost sheep. Their shepherds have caused them to go astray. They have turned them away on the mountains. They have gone from mountain to hill, and they have forgotten their resting place. And now we're being returned to our resting place, and we're being gathered by the word of the Heavenly Father. All right, so Lord willing, this was edifying with that. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, by Hashem Yahweh Shai, by Hashem Rakakadash. Kahalayim Yahweh, by Hashem Yahweh Shai, by Hashem Rakakadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are the elders of Yasher Allah, and a sincere salutation to all you Akim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Akwathim, who are believing this word in all truth and in sincerity. Shalom, shalom. And the water for tuning in. Kahalayim Yahweh by Hashem Yahweh Shai.